So, do we think that Andy Kaufman and Jim Carrey went too far and broke these rules? I guess we could go one by one. Like, I think in both cases, obviously, Andy Kaufman and Jim Carrey, at least in my view, are pretty great people and influential people that changed a lot of things in positive ways. But then there's also some things that are pretty dark about some of the actions that we took. Like, do you think that overall their behavior was pathological, or was just they were playing a different kind of game and demonstrating a different way to live that was overall good?
I mean, one thing that's interesting also in Crime and Punishment is the main character puts forward this idea that there are like great men, and that if you're destined for greatness, it's okay to break the normal rules, but that most people should follow the normal rules. And it's almost like, it almost seems like, as unappealing as that idea is, it almost seems like we do kind of hold it as a society. Like if you look at people like Andy Kaufman or Jim Carrey, like Andy Kaufman in particular, but like he broke a lot of rules and he was an asshole in a lot of situations, but he did great things. Like it worked. Whereas if you look at someone who is disruptive and acts like a jerk and it just doesn't work and they just end up like not producing anything and no one finds it appealing, then people are we're like kind of less forgiving of that.
Yeah, exactly. People are just like, wow, what a jerk. People don't sit there and go, well, at least he tried. Like if you break a bunch of rules and then fail, then yeah, people will just be like, wow, what an asshole. But you're right. If it works, then you can, that's kind of ties into what I was saying before. Like you're taking a risk basically, but you can end up like way, way out ahead if your risk pays off.
So are we basically saying that we think that Andy Kaufman was cool because he succeeded?
I mean, it's not irrelevant.
Yeah, it's not.
So, and this ties into what I was saying earlier with sort of psychopathology being adaptive. Like, like, was he a great person? I don't know, but he definitely was rich and successful and made a big impact on things and probably did actually end up destroying some of the rules that had previously been in place and increased the freedom of future performers. So, you could say you could have the same argument about basically anybody famous ever in history. I mean, we can look at conquerors and politicians and statesmen and inventors. A lot of them, you start looking back in their history and you're like, wow, this person was a dick, but somehow they leave this mark on humanity and people like forget the bad stuff. It's weird.
It's like Steve Jobs is a great example. Like he was such a dick. Like he was Steve Jobs, right? Like if if there had just been the asshole stuff and there hadn't been all the amazing stuff and he had been like, I don't know, unemployed and whatever, people, wouldn't be remembered well.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think maybe it's a little bit different in Andy's case, because in Andy's case, like a lot of what made him famous and a lot of his greatness was in being a dick. Like like playing the dick was the thing, because it was almost like, kind of like we said about the wrestling, it was like almost like a commentary on how people can get away with being dicks, maybe. But then maybe like Dan said, maybe we're just reading too much into him. I do tend to think though that he was maybe not planning out how people would think about him in the future and like thinking about his legacy, but I think that he was consciously playing with societal rules. I don't think he was just an ass. I think he was poking at and toying with these things on purpose in order to kind of criticize them and explore them.
It's kind of a social norm hacker.
But they're always interconnected though, like the greatness and the assholery. Like if Napoleon had been too soft-hearted to send an army out to war, he wouldn't have been Napoleon, right? But maybe what makes Andy different is he was more conscious of it.
Well, yeah, but also a lot of people died because of Napoleon. I mean, he was a great person, in a sense, because he did big things. But the bad stuff that he did was maybe balanced out, or balanced out the good stuff that he did. It's hard to say like, did he do more good than bad in the end?
I would judge Napoleon pretty harshly. I don't know.
I mean, a lot of the things...
we want to parse out the way that we're using great to mean like noteworthy versus like ethically good or produced positive effects for society as a whole.
Well, and I think most people actually do conflate those things. People look back and read about somebody in history and they kind of assume, oh yeah, this person was a great guy because he was on the right side of history.
That's a good point. I think that we were kind of conflating that in this conversation. So when we say great, I think we're talking about large and impactful, not necessarily like Genghis Khan was also great. Genghis Khan is somebody that history tends to judge super harshly. Maybe they'll say that he was great, but a great man, but not a great guy, you know?
Yeah.
It's a complicated relationship, right? It's great. It means big, but it also kind of means successful. And you can argue that to be successful, you have to create systems that benefit people. Like, we don't like that Napoleon was responsible for a lot of death, but if it wasn't for the Napoleonic Code, you wouldn't have like civil rights and stuff like that as we know them today.
Very true.
Ooh, that's weird.